Today we're going to be talking about Heritage Dungeon Dwellers. This was one of the most popular lines of miniatures in the early 80s, and they're still quite popular to some collectors today. Many of the figures, even though they were unofficial, looked pretty much exactly like the sketches in the original Monster Manual. And overall, even though the figures are very simple, they have a unique charm to them, which you really don't see that much in modern miniatures. Included in the eBay lot that I won is this handy-dandy painting guide. More on that later. As you can see from the Knoll miniatures, this is old school stuff. Knolls started off as a combination of gnomes and trolls, rather than the hyena boys that we all know today. Those appeared in the very first Monster Manual for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. And another blast from the past, Blood Birds. These live on in D&D as Blood Hawks. You can find those in the Creature Appendix in the modern 5e Monster Manual. And of course we have kobolds, our favorite little dog dragon boys, looking a little bit more like dragons in this edition. We have some shrieker mushrooms, always a fun time to add those to your campaign. And some lovely scatter, some treasure chests, and some little bits of stuff. And some human enemies. These are berserkers and some brigands. And we have some very small giant centipedes. I found these charming because they had the instructions on the pack. As I was going through my stuff, I found out that I had a Dungeon Dweller orc, but this is actually the Reaper version of the old Heritage model, where they took the mold and they replaced the classic cobblestone base with their Reaper cauliflower base. So it's the original mold, but it's not produced by Heritage. And speaking of bases, that is probably why I managed to get this eBay lot for so cheap. Whoever originally owned these miniatures cut them off the original base and kind of put them on these oversized 30mm bases, which is okay, but obviously collectors would rather have the original bases and the original miniatures intact. As I went through my collection, I found out that I actually had a number of the original Heritage miniatures just kind of mixed in with the Grenadier stuff, and I was very surprised. These are a little bit rare to find, and they're very charming. I always assumed these were all Grenadier, because mostly they had nothing on the base to denote that they were Heritage. But I did note on this Cyclops, he actually has something very interesting on the base. The sculptor's name. I thought that was very interesting. I hardly ever see that, and it seems like a good thing to credit the sculptor on the actual art itself. Now, a lot of the monsters will fit in okay with modern miniatures, but unfortunately the player characters are very small, seemingly a little bit smaller than 25mm. The scale is all over the place, as you can see from these elves. Do your research, don't buy these miniatures, and assume they're going to fit in well with the rest of your collection. So back to that painting guide, I thought it would be a fun thing to try to do a speed paint in that fashion, so I looked up the instructions for painting kobolds. I was happy to see that they would still have the reddish shade, and this is how it turned out with a speed paint. These guys, I love the sculpt on these guys. I mean, some of it's a little bit messy, but it's very charming in a way, and there are some details you can get out of these Heritage Dungeon Dwellers. I was very happy with this little paint job here, and I might speed paint up the rest of them, just so I can use them in my game as soon as possible. So other than the old school miniatures, Reaper started to do a modern line of the Dungeon Dweller miniatures in both metal and the new Reaper Bones Black. Now, I managed to score some very cheap miniatures in the Reaper Bones Black material in my local flagship gaming store. So when your local gaming store opens back up, or if you can order online, you might want to check to see if they have any of these in stock. If you're interested in learning more about Heritage miniatures, D&D Lead has an excellent write-up about them, and I had a lot of fun going through the Lost Minis Wiki, trying to figure out if my loose, random metal miniatures were actually original Heritage miniatures, and some of them were. I hope you enjoyed this look back at some of the very old school miniatures that you might find while looking for miniature deals out in the wild. Please let me know in the comments below if you like using very old school miniatures in your modern D&D games.